Reminder, the University of Chicago is a tax-exempt 501c3 organization. It does not support or oppose any candidate for political office. For upcoming events, tomorrow morning, we are hosting a live taping of the Hacks on Tap podcast hosted by David Axelrod and Mike Murphy. These are two campaign veterans on both sides of the aisle. They will give us a preview of what to expect in the Iowa caucuses next week. Coffee and pastries will be provided. A quick note, our public programming is on brief hiatus next week as we take students to the Iowa caucuses. On February 10th, we'll be hosting a panel discussion on the impact of the impeachment trial, both on the 2020 presidential race and the impact on our democracy. You can find out more about that and all of our upcoming programming on our website at politics.uchicago.edu. After our program is over tonight, we will take questions from the audience. We will open up the floor to take questions. Please line up behind the microphone that will be in the center aisle. And let's all remember that everyone is welcome at the mic. As usual, we give priority for the first three questions to be asked by students. A little bit more housekeeping. Let's please make sure that our phones are on silent. Restrooms are on the second floor. And here to formally introduce our speaker is Christos Papandreou. Christos is a second year from Houston, Texas, studying economics. This year, he is secretary of the UChicago College Republicans. Please join me in welcoming Christos to the podium.
Good evening, everyone. It's with great pleasure that I introduce Governor Bill Weld to you tonight. Governor Weld is from Smithtown, New York. He attended Harvard for his BA in the classics and studied economics at Oxford, and finally graduated with a JD from Harvard Law. He began his legal career as counsel to the United States House Committee on the Judiciary, where he contributed to the constitutional grounds for presidential impeachment report, which helped to clarify the basis and standards for the impeachment of a sitting president. He later became the U.S. Attorney for the District of Massachusetts and finally Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division during the Reagan presidency. Weld was elected governor of Massachusetts in 1990, and then in 1994, he was reelected by the largest margin of victory in Massachusetts history. During his governorship, he signed an executive order to recognize domestic partnership rights for same-sex couples. In 1993, he signed laws that protected same-sex students. He worked to expand Medicaid in Massachusetts by requesting more federal funding and allowing more people to qualify for the program. In 2016, he ran as the vice presidential candidate on the Libertarian ticket. Interestingly, the first presidential ticket to include two governors running together since 1948. Together, they garnered nearly 4.5 million votes, breaking the Libertarian Party's record for absolute vote total. He rejoined the Republican Party on January 17, 2019, and on April 15th, he announced his candidacy for the Republican presidency nomination in 2020. His campaign stands at odds with the incumbent President Donald Trump on many policies, including abortion, LGBT rights, and government spending. Tonight's moderator is Rob Wildeboer. Mr. Wildeboer is a senior editor at WBEZ. His team has been honored by Amnesty International for excellence in human rights reporting, and he has received numerous awards from the Associated Press in both Illinois and Indiana. He has taught journalism in the graduate program at Columbia College and at North Park University. Please join me in welcoming Rob Wildeboer and Governor Bill Weld.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Governor. Thank you for being here, and thanks to all of you for being here. It's an honor to get to have this conversation tonight. And I guess first off, why are you running for president?
Oh, you're starting off with a trick question.
That's a softball. They're going to get worse. No.
So, you know, I would not be doing this if it was 2017 and the president had just been elected. We didn't know enough then about how he was going to comport himself in office. I think now, after 3 years, we do. And I wouldn't be doing it if Mike Pence were the president, even though the VP is a strong social conservative on issues like reproductive rights and civil rights for gays and lesbians and gay marriage. And I had a big part in that becoming the law of the land, having appointed the woman who wrote the opinion that went to the Supreme Court, was the basis for marriage equality. But although Mr. Pence is a strong social conservative, a bunch of people I know served with him in the House and thought he was kind of a leader in the House. And, you know, he and I are together on some issues like education. And, you know, I don't have to be president of the United States. But I felt as time wore on, certainly by the beginning of 2019, that we were in extraordinary times, and extraordinarily dangerous times, times such as I hoped I would never see in the United States of America. So that's why I'm running, and I'll get into that in more detail as we go along. But I think our country is not only in a parlous and perilous position, I think it's in an emergency position.
Well, what changed? Because you said that, you know, if this was 2017, you wouldn't be doing this. It seems like there were lots of hints in the campaign that Donald Trump might be somewhat controversial. What changed? What did you not know by Election Day of 2016 that?
Listen, I like controversial, and I hate political correctness. I found Mr. Trump rather refreshing in the early going because he's so politically incorrect, as am I. And, you know, I can remember watching a debate when there were still 12 or 13 Republicans up there on the stage and jumping up for the third time in 3 questions and saying, wait a minute. Because we had known Mr. Trump and his wife in New York. My wife and I lived in New York from 2000 to 2010. And people in New York think he's a buffoon. And he's run for president 6 times. But I said, wait a minute, that's the best answer for the 3rd time in a row is from Trump. So I began to take him a little bit more seriously. I wouldn't have ever endorsed him for president, even in 2016, because I know his history in New York, which is of being an extremely dishonest businessman. And, you know, he did not, the few dinner parties and cocktail parties that I was with him at, he didn't really come out of his shell. It wasn't the Donald Trump that you saw on the entertainment stage in 2016 or since. It is true, it was during the 2016 campaign that he said I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. We kind of thought he was joking, but that became, you know, a seed that turned out to be the pearl in the oyster, and that shell kept growing. And it went from bad to worse along those lines. And I would not be running against Mr. Trump if it was just that he's spending, overspending by $1 trillion a year, and that he's, you know, trashing our allies on the foreign policy front, and that I think he has no understanding of the fact that nuclear proliferation has to be a taboo, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm running against Mr. Trump because I think I can do the job. I've thought about running twice before. I think I could start Monday. But beyond that, this is the man who now says a free press is the enemy of the people. An independent judiciary is a threat to all of us. We shouldn't have independent judges, because what if you get a judge who's a Mexican? He can't judge anything fairly because he's a Mexican. This is Mr. Trump, who started out railing against Muslims, went on to Hispanics, and the rest is history. His entire 2016 was a series of dog whistles, but even that would not have been enough to get me to run against him. So I'm running because, and this is not the only policy issue I have to put on the table, but I honestly think he's a threat to our democracy. And I say that as one who is steeped in the founders' enactment of the removal clause and all the reasons for it.
And so I don't want to hang on it too long, but at the same time, a lot of the things you're talking about that are troubling now seem to have been, you know, present in the campaign in 2016.
Well, if you wind the tape back, I suppose the thing about shooting people on Fifth Avenue is very bad, but it was taken as a joke at the time. Certainly the outrageous racism was present during the campaign. You know, we
But that didn't concern you enough at that point to?
Well, no, I made a lot of noise about it in 16. I went right at this guy from day one in 16. The first show we were on was on CNN, and they said, tell me the first word that crosses your mind when I say this. Donald Trump. And I said, huckster. That remains my assessment. And then the next day I said, I don't like this anti-immigrant stuff. It reminds me of Kristallnacht and Anne Frank hiding in the attic when the Gestapo comes and knocks at the door. And everyone said, oh, you can't mention Hitler? That's beyond the pale in, you know, American political campaigns. You can't do that. But I kept coming back to it because the parallel, this is during the campaign, the parallel seemed so strong. I was on Morning Joe at the end of the campaign, and I brought out a copy of 1984, the book by George Orwell. I said, I just want to read a page from this. And Mike Barnacle says, go right ahead. So I read it. It's the passage near the beginning of the book called 2-Minute Hate. And 1984 is the book where Big Brother runs the show, and everyone has to be in an apartment with a big TV screen that Big Brother can look at them through anytime he wants. And for 2 minutes every afternoon, they have 2-minute hate. And you have to watch the screen. If you're trying to hide in the bathroom, you don't get away with it. So everyone in the whole country is looking at the screen at the same time. And for 2 minutes, they beam hate through the television screen. And at the end of it, everybody is just exhausted, and they're filled with hatred, and they're not quite sure who they hate or why it is, but they certainly feel weak, and it makes them more malleable. And, you know, Mr. Trump has filled our ears with an unremitting diet of poisonous negativity and outright lies, and I think we've been worn down. And, you know, one of the things that a would-be dictator or autocrat likes to do is to get the people in a more malleable frame of mind so that when the man on horseback rides in, that would be Mr. Trump in this case, they'll stand up and salute, which is the equivalent of look at the emperor's wonderful new clothes.
So that's some pretty harsh words for your party. What do you make of the fact that, you know, the Republicans support him? What does that mean for the party? What do you make of that as a Republican?
Well, I'm not talking about the rank and file because, you know, I think in flyover country, a lot of people felt left behind, and guess what? They might have had a point, meaning just in the whole middle of the country, not the coasts. You know, globalization, you gain some jobs, you lose some jobs, and the jobs that we gained were the highest paying jobs, because that's what always happens. That's why the United States always profits from free trade. And those probably, with the exception of Chicago and a few other places like Chicago, those probably tended to be concentrated on the coasts. So people were right to feel a certain amount of recrimination. It's just that Mr. Trump made it his business to turn that into resentment and use that for his own political purposes. So, you know, the people out there, the Trump, I must say I don't meet as many Trump supporters as I do people who just can't wait to get rid of him, but I engage Trump supporters in the diners and in the Apple Festival and the Pumpkin Festival, and most of them, if it's not too late in the afternoon, are, you know, perfectly willing to have a civil conversation and say, yeah, listen, he speaks for me, and I don't know what you're doing. What are you about here? This is not too many voters, and this is mostly in New Hampshire. We just spent 5 days in Iowa, and everyone, I felt like the two-headed cow at the Iowa State Fair. Everybody wanted to come see me. There is a Republican alternative to Donald Trump. We don't have to live with Donald Trump for the next 14, 18 years when he does his 3 or 4 terms as president. And they wanted to come and see me. And like that. Every time I see Elizabeth Warren on the campaign trail, she comes up and kind of gives me a little pat, almost maternal. She says, take care of yourself. And she doesn't mean do push-ups. She means, don't die, please don't die.
What is the strategy here? And are you, you know, you're going up against the sitting president in the primary, pretty tough uphill battle. are you doing it because you think there's actually a path to victory for you and you actually expect to win that primary, or is there another angle here that you're trying to achieve?
Well, both. And let me say, when I started running for governor in Massachusetts, having lost my previous race for Attorney General by a margin of 79% to 21%, the largest margin in state history, I was below asterisk. And everybody who wished me well said, "Kid, don't do this. You're just going to humiliate yourself and your family, and you're going to destroy your law practice. It's going to be the end of your life." And it looked for a time as though they were right. I lost the Republican convention by such a wide margin that the party officially came out for my opponent in the primary. But I kind of stuck with it. I was like, you know, the ant. I won the primary narrowly and the general election narrowly. I was kind of a fluke governor because my opponent, John Silber, the president of Boston University, very brilliant man, and he'd been kind of a hero of my generation because he got fired by the Board of Regents in Texas. And we were all, as undergraduates, of course, we were all liberals, and thought that he was the hero and the Texas Regents were bad. And when he came up to Boston University, he did a great job. So he was 11 points ahead with 7 days to go. And he got mad at a couple of Madonna-like female anchors on TV, and the rest was history. So I was kind of an accidental governor, but I did get there. And answer the bulk of your question.
So things kind of exploded for him, and then who was left standing? It was
yeah, that's right.
you.
And that could
there could be some comparisons.
Oh yeah,
to
no,
our present.
that could happen again. For example, you know, even if Mr. Trump is not removed from office by the Senate, which he richly deserves to be under the constitutional precedents, which I'll get into, you know, he might get enough bad press from that so his star would really sink. And any time from now on is too late for anybody else to get in. It's too late for Ted Cruz. It's too late for Marco Rubio. There are too many ballot access deadlines that have gone by. So guess what? I would be the only guy standing. So that's one possible path. Another path is to either win New Hampshire or greatly exceed expectations, which won't be hard since people expect me to get about 2% of the vote in New Hampshire because they see this great big behemoth, and I won't say little Billy Weld, but certainly in terms of impression on you know, people's daily news consumption, it's not comparable. New Hampshire does decide late, but you know, it would be, as you say, a long shot. But say I do much better than expectations there, that would get a little bit of a following wind going into Super Tuesday. I'm just talking politics now. And that's Massachusetts, Vermont, Colorado, California. It's 14 states. And if I performed significantly there, say I win 2 or 3 states, you know, we think of my friend John Kasich as having been the runner-up last time. He won 1 state. And if someone wins 2, 3 states against Mr. Trump in the early going, I think you'd see the knives come out.
And you said, so that's kind of the political path to maybe winning. What other things are you hoping to achieve with the candidacy?
Well, you know, people from the press say, so you in it to win it? I say, yeah, I'm in it to win it. What do I look like, stupid? They say, but suppose you don't win New Hampshire, but you do well enough to put a hole underneath the waterline in Mr. Trump's ship. Would that be winning? And I have to sort of wipe the grin off my face and say my memorized line, which is, no, that would not be winning, but it would be a significant achievement. And then I allow myself to smile.
So here in Illinois, a lot of the Republicans, we call the counties around Cook County the collar counties. They've been trending a little more Democratic in the last 20 years. So a lot of the Republicans in Illinois have been kind of, you know, biting their tongue. When Trump was running during the election, some of them were slow to, you know, identify themselves with Trump or his policies or his candidacy. But they also didn't want to, like, you know, repudiate him either because they didn't want to alienate some of their base, some of their Republican base that may have supported Trump. Can you talk about the you're fairly, strident in some of your comments about the president. Can you talk about the position that Republican office holders find themselves in, and how should they negotiate that? And then specifically, I mean, senators right now U.S. senators are weighing this and saying, no witnesses still. What's the right thing to do there, and what's the politically smart thing to do there?
Well, last time I was a candidate, so I wasn't similarly situated with all the Republicans who wanted to hold on to their seat. I didn't have a seat I wanted to hold on to, and I'd been head of the criminal division of the Justice Department under Reagan, with FBI and CIA reporting to me. I've been in the black world as well as the white world, black world meaning secret world. And when you've had that kind of experience, you're really not prepared to be scared of anybody ever again. And I wouldn't have been anyway. So a lot of the factors that lead people to be analyzing what's the right move here wouldn't apply to me. I always do what I want to do, which I always think is the right thing, and full speed ahead, and damn the torpedoes. And it's not everybody's dish of tea, but it's my dish of tea.
Well, as governor, there must have been things you thought and wanted to say, and you're like, no, that's going to alienate those people to no good end, so I'm just going to bite my tongue.
Absolutely not. Never. Never. In any context that I can think of.
Okay, you're giving me a challenge. I'm gonna
So I suppose those Collar County reps that you referred to, they're in a position similar to the people in Washington who are keeping their mouths shut now. And I thought at first it might be something as benign as Stockholm Syndrome. They were just identifying with their captor, who is Mr. Trump. But I've settled on thinking that it's an obsession to get reelected, which comes out of, predates Trump, comes out of the poisonous relationship between the two parties. They're locked in a death spiral embrace. This is in Washington only, not in the states. But it's a death spiral embrace. It's an embrace because they need each other to scare their own base into giving them enough money so they can get reelected. And once they get reelected, they all come back and everything's hunky-dory, and it's all smiles, and they agree to compromise on the budget. And the Dems wanted 5% more in social spending. The Rs wanted 5% more on military, and they get together and they pat themselves on the back because they agree to compromise, reach across the aisle, phrases you'll hear at that time of year, compromising, and they raise everything by 15%. So once again, they're grinding the face of the tax-paying public in the dirt. My motto for a long time, and including when I was governor, is there's no such thing as government money, there's only taxpayers' money. And that's why I was ranked the most fiscally conservative governor in the United States when I was in office, despite the fact that I was coming right after 3 terms of Mike Dukakis in Massachusetts, which until I got there was universally known as Taxachusetts. Still is in Texas. No love lost there. But I don't know if that's a swing at your question.
Well, what do you think now of, the day's events over the last week? Republicans are trying to prevent more witnesses. We've got the revelations from John Bolton that would contradict Trump's defense, it would appear. Should Republican senators be calling more witnesses?
Of course they should. Listen, when I worked for the House Judiciary Committee on the Nixon impeachment, I had to read every word of every page of every impeachment trial in history. It simply never happened that the House voted articles, they appointed their managers, the managers trotted over to the Senate, said, senators, here are witnesses, here's our documentary evidence, let us know exactly how you'd like to proceed. It's never happened that the Senate has said, we don't want to hear anything. We don't want to hear anything, we don't want to see anything, we don't want you to speak anything. So this is breaking new, very bad ground. And, I haven't heard any arguments from any Republicans in Washington for months now. All I've heard is conclusions, conclusions with no basis in law or fact. And the idea that there should not be witnesses is absolutely crazy and totally unprecedented. But, consider the host for all those parasites down there. The host has said, and he's the first person in history to say it, I've got an Article 2. Aha, it's special. It lets me do anything I want. And it went from that, which sounded like sort of a sing-song child's nursery rhyme joke No, he's never more serious in his life. And he went on from that to, actually, the House and Senate have no right to subpoena anything from me. They have no power of oversight over me, and they can't make me or anybody in the executive branch do anything, which is totally ripping up and rewriting the entire structure of our government in the Constitution. And, you know, the impeachment power and the removal power were put in there for a reason. It wasn't they were worried that somebody would conceal a third-rate burglary in a basement of a hotel. They weren't worried that someone would be so embarrassed by his own personal conduct that he would take liberties with the truth and attempt to cover up. They were worried that somebody might invite foreign interference in our affairs. And they were worried that somebody might commit what they called corruption of office, by which they meant nothing less, nothing more than use of the office to advance his own personal interests, whether financial, political, whatever, over the interests of the country. Both of those, which are the top two concerns of the framers, which is blazoned all over the Federalist Papers and Farrand's debates on the adoption of the Constitution, all over that period. They were the top two concerns, and they're both here in spades in the Ukrainian caper and the obstruction article as well, in that, you know, it's right in there in Article 1 and Article 2. Article 1, which is the Congress, the most important of the articles, they have oversight authority over the executive. These colonists were suspicious of the executive. They hadn't had one under the Articles of Confederation, which governed the colonies from 1774 until 1787. The last executive they remembered was George III, and they were not too fond of the memory. So in order to get the Constitution ratified, they had to put in this removal clause. They wanted to anyway, as a check and a balance. And I think it's fair to say that the impeachment and removal clauses are put in there as yet another system of checks and balances in our government. And you know, they are aimed squarely at anybody who interferes with the anticipated workings of our constitutional government, which includes very much the checks and balances in it. And Mr. Trump has just gone around like shooting at clay pigeons, just committing every type of activity and offense that the framers envisioned.
Have you, are you close, do you have any close relationships with Republican senators, and have you discussed this with them?
Yeah, I know almost all the senior Republicans. I've actually raised a lot of money over the years for the Republican National Party. When Haley Barbour was the national chairman, he came to me. Haley's from Mississippi. He says, Bill, all these big donors, they're all pro-choice. We gotta just talk to them for an hour and a half before we even get to the ask. You're pro-choice, and you don't have to dribble around the court for an hour and a half. You can go right for the hoop. So I did, and I raised a lot of money for those folks. Haley was a dear favorite of mine. Yeah, I know almost all the senior people, including the conservatives. I've raised a lot of money for Mitch and Judge Cornyn, as well as my particular friends who would be Romney, Collins, Portman, and Murkowski. I have a good relationship with all the usual suspects, the top 7. And I've talked to some of them, but I'm not going to spot anybody.
That's fine, but what are they telling you about witnesses? And did you say, like, hey, you guys really ought to bring some...
Oh, no, I haven't talked to them in the last few days, so I haven't talked about witnesses. But I've sure talked on television almost every night about witnesses and how this is unthinkable. And it gets a little more personal than that. I say, if the Republicans persist in this sort of lapidary, hear no evil, see no evil, stance that they seem to be in kind of a trance in, first of all, they're all going to lose their seats, those ones. And if it's everybody in the Senate who takes that position, you're going to see a Democratic Senate next year, as sure as I'm sitting here. But I get even meaner than that. I say, and they're going to go down in history, on a par with the Black Sox who threw the 1919 World Series. I won't mention the town they were from.
Too soon. You ran as a Libertarian in 2016. you're now back in the Republican Party. What kind of reception has your malleability on party loyalty, and how do you think about that?
I'm not a big loyalty man. I think loyalty is too often, particularly in Washington, an excuse for doing the wrong thing. So, you know, and I'm not loyal to party to the point of sublimating my own assessment of the issues. You know, it didn't require any change in my thinking on any issue to go from Republican over to Libertarian and back to Republican. As a matter of fact, of the three-party platforms, probably Libertarian is the closest choice for me because I don't have to wear the socially conservative policies of the Republican Party like a 300-pound pack on my back the way I always used to. Except that I didn't really, because everyone in Massachusetts knew that I didn't buy that stuff, and I was, you know, the first in the country to get way out there on gay rights and on reproductive rights, and I've adhered to that. And you know, you think I'm mean about Trump? You should hear me about these legislatures that pass these reproductive rights, so-called statutes in the South and parts of the Midwest recently that give more rights to a rapist than to his victim, which they do.
And do you think there's more room in the Republican Party for kind of some ideological diversity, like say in the 80s compared to now, or less? Or how do you?
Well, I think there's always room for it because it's the way to go. I mean, I was at the sub-cabinet level under Reagan, and everybody knew that of the Republicans in Washington and the administration, half of us were movement conservatives, social conservatives, and the other half were libertarians and right on top of the table. And we would joke about it before, during, and after our morning meeting in the Justice Department, and then we'd go out and get the boss's work done, and the boss was Ronald Reagan. And, you know, he was always strongly pro-life, but he didn't go around rubbing people's nose in it. And we didn't, you know, our colleagues at the table, we didn't say, how come you're not on my side? That's not the way you act in politics, or not the way you should act. So these, you know, exclusion tests are not the way to build a winning coalition in politics. And I'm surprised that the Republicans don't understand that.
Under Reagan, I think you were in the Department of Justice as an assistant attorney general,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
In
criminal
the criminal division. I'm wondering what kinds of things you're thinking about now about criminal justice. As you know, what would be your criminal justice platform? And I'm curious if there are any, you know, things you did either as a U.S. attorney or as, you know, policies you promoted or were part of crafting, or ways you thought about things in the 80s that you now think back on as kind of the country is grappling with mass incarceration.
Oh, yeah.
How did we get here?
Not when I was U.S. attorney, because there I did what I wanted. But when I got to Washington, that's a staff job. So it's supposedly a big promotion. Not really. U.S. attorney is a much better job than assistant AG. And one of my responsibilities in Washington, and I did this without screaming too loudly, was mandatory minimums as a result of the Crime Act of 1994. No, because I was there a little bit before that, but where the U.S. Sentencing Commission had just been created, so I was a liaison to them. And they did issue mandatory sentencing guidelines, and the judges screamed bloody murder, and we went straight ahead with that. But, you know, now, later in life, come to find out that, for example, there are 17,000 people in federal prisons who have been there for more than 8 years for possessory marijuana offenses, and most of them are minorities. And this is not good for business. So I supported Cory Booker's proposed law that would free those 17,000 people and do a bunch of other things. One of my sons works for the Southern Poverty Law Center in Detroit, and he's working on bail reform there. And the bail system is just crazy. You know, the bail bondsmen don't even have any risk anymore. It's been squeezed out by statute. So it's kind of almost a conspiracy between the bail bondsmen and the judiciary to haul in a lot of cash, because these people under the bail system, once they're arrested, they're not going to get out before trial. And they're not people of means, but they keep getting nicked with another $500 fine for having something wrong with their driver's license. Now, if you don't have a driver's license in Detroit, Michigan, you're not going to hold a job because there's not exactly a huge subway system there to help you out. But that's just an example. So bail reform, sentencing reform, very much on my mind. You know, the First Step law was a good first step, but it's only a first step.
You are for you know, extending America's power abroad, and I'm wondering how you think of that, and to what end should America be engaging in the world?
Well, I think we should be totally engaging everywhere. It doesn't mean you have to spend and spill American blood and treasure every time you see something you don't like in another country. You know, I'm never in favor of boots on the ground for regime change just because we disapprove of this country. Afghanistan would be a case in point. You know, people said when the question was raised in the last election, why don't we bring the troops home from Afghanistan? And the answer was, no, not now, not now. Now would be a very awkward time. Well, we've been there for 18 years. So what would be a good time from your point of view, Mr. Opponent? How about never? Does never work for you? Oh yeah, never works very well. And that doesn't make any sense. So at the same time, and I gave a talk at the Chicago Council of Global Affairs this morning, you know, I think we have a responsibility to help preserve the world order that we helped to create after World War II. And it has been a source of great prosperity for the world as a whole. Billions of people moving out of poverty. It's kept the nuclear peace. And I do think we do bear a responsibility not to invade other countries, but to let our allies know that we've got their back covered. If they're not going to become nuclear powers, they shouldn't worry about that. We've got their back covered. And the reason I say that is if you get a large number of nuclear powers, it becomes geometrically harder to keep the nuclear peace. And we've kept it because we've only had a small number. And Mr. Trump, you know, ripped up the treaty with Iran, and it wasn't just us. Our European allies were parties to that treaty also. So now we have Iran back on a course to nuclear weapons. He suggested to Japan and South Korea that they should develop their own nuclear weapons programs because he thinks that would be fun. He's just massively ignorant on international matters.
As a Republican with, well, libertarian, more than libertarian leanings, I'm wondering how you think of Obamacare and health care in the United States.
Well, Obamacare, to be fair, added 20 million people to the rolls of the insured. That was very helpful in terms of cost containment. It has a little bit, you know, pre-existing condition. That was an idea whose time had come. So there's much of it, I think, was very constructive. I do think there's a little bit too much government in the current system for my taste. I've proposed that people be able to build up medical savings accounts like retirement accounts, which would be tax advantaged, meaning you could take money that you had earned, put it in a medical savings account to store up nuts against the winter, against an exigent or even emergent healthcare situation in your family, and then you're driving the bus more. Right now, the law says everyone's got to have a Cadillac plan, and I say, well, wait a minute. If people want to have a Chevrolet plan, they should be able to do that, and the answer is no. And when the law was passed, unfortunately, there was some more than staff talk along the lines of, no, people are so stupid that if we don't make all the decisions for them, they'll die, and we don't want to have that blood on our hands. You know, that's a little bit dirigiste from my point of view. So I'd want to have more decision-making pressed down to the doctor and patient level and let the patients also get the economic bat in their hands as opposed to having the government decide everything that has to be done under every circumstance. But that's not radical surgery. It's a big difference in tone, but it's not radical surgery.
Okay, we want to turn the questions over to the audience. So if you have questions, please step up to the mic. Again, a reminder, the first three questions we're going to hear from students. So those of you who are not students, please give a chance to some of them first. And while we're setting up that mic, if you don't win the Republican primary to be your party's presidential candidate, it sounds like you won't vote for Trump, given what you've said here.
Under no circumstances for any office ever.
So you'll be voting for a Democrat?
No, I might vote for a Libertarian.
Okay. And if you don't vote for a Libertarian candidate, who would be the Democrat that stands out to you right now?
Well, centrist Democrats. Joe Biden would be one obvious example. I've known Joe mostly in Washington for 25 years. We have a very good relationship, but he's not the only one. I know Mike Bloomberg very well from New York City. Lived there for 10 years when he was the mayor, was active in his re-election campaigns. Klobuchar, I've just met fleetingly in Washington, but certainly her politics are well within my range of comfortableness. I have trouble adding up all the zeros with Senator Warren and Senator Sanders, even though I like and admire both of them personally a great deal. My God, Sanders is a force of nature. Elizabeth Warren is a very nice person. But boy, you add up all those zeros, the tax rates are going to go up, by multiples. And they're not going to stop with the first proposal. And again, I hate to pick on Senator Warren because I like her so much, but she has a 2% tax on wealth. Well, when the progressive federal income tax was being debated in 1913 in Congress, some people said, and it was 0.5% on income. Some people said, well, if this Congress can impose a 0.5% tax on income, what's to prevent some later Congress from imposing a tax of 1% or even 2%? And the objection, which carried the day, was, don't be ridiculous. The possibility of abuse of a power is no argument against its existence in the first place. So I took Economics 1 a few decades after that, 5 decades, and the marginal rate was 91%. So guess what? The 2% tax on wealth is not going to stay at 2%.
All right. Do we have any questions? We've got 3 students lined up here, it would seem. I'm pointing at you, sir. Go ahead.
Sure, thank you. So Donald Trump was known in New York City for 40 years. He was called a joke, an idiot, a vulgarian with small hands, and so on. Apparently, he broke the law many times. And if people seriously look at him, he will be in prison and could not be running for president. Why do you think it's not happened?
I don't know. He's led a charmed life. I mean, when he says, my moral tutor, my mentor was Roy Cohn, that's all you need to know about Donald Trump. And you're right. When he had the housing business, he and his father, they used to boast, we have ways of preventing those people, meaning blacks, browns, minorities, from getting apartments in our apartment complexes. And he got convicted of that. And he had the reputation of being the most dishonest businessman in New York, and no one I knew would even think about doing business with him. And when he went bankrupt in Atlantic City, which he did 4 times, he always made sure that the little people, the vendors who built his casinos, didn't get paid. And he and the bankers would go off with hundreds of millions of dollars, and they created that pile of money by not paying the vendors. I mean, his track record in business, it's simply amazing. I agree with your premise.
Do you think if he had some real enemies in New York, they can help him to go to prison and save us from him, theoretically, before, not now, of course?
Oh, I think he's got some enemies in New York right now. They work for the United States Justice Department.
But it's maybe too late now.
The only reason they're enemies of his, not that they don't like him, it's because they're sworn to uphold the law. And I think I can say without fear of too much contradiction that Mr. Trump in office has shown an inability to conform his conduct not only to the requirements of law, but to any norms whatsoever. This is a man who makes absolutely no demands on himself. which is, I think, one of his least appealing characteristics, and there's a basket full.
The most shocking thing about the Trump-Zelensky call was not the Biden investigation so much as Trump's demand that Zelensky give credence to the story that Ukraine, not Russia, hacked the DNC servers. And we know this was a Putin talking point. But I'm wondering whether if evidence of Trump's finances actually comes out, so it's not speculation, but a proven fact, that this fiction of Trump as successful businessman was created by Russian investments, that there is a pattern of reciprocities over a very long period of time that shows that Trump is actually a creature of a foreign power. Now, my question is, if that becomes not speculation, but fact from tax returns and Deutsche Bank records, would that undermine Trump's support among Republicans?
Well, you're not going to see anything in his tax returns. They'll be plain vanilla, maybe Deutsche Bank records. The word on the street in New York, you're correct, is that Trump was floundering around, not doing very well. Suddenly, he started to have a lot more cash on his hands to invest in projects, and the word on the street is that was laundering Russian money. And that would explain a lot, almost everything, an early tie to Russia. And I don't know that for a fact. I'm just telling you what's speculated in New York. And I don't think his finances, you know, you didn't make as much money as you said you did. No, that would have no impact on anybody. And this man, you know, has broken new ground in terms of desensitizing us. No, I'm not going to hand over my tax returns. There's nothing in them. And people lay down for that. People have lain down for a lot for this guy, and I don't understand it. But again, I do agree with you.
Hi, my name is Alexandra. I'm a second year in the college. Thank you for speaking with us. My question is, do you think there's an appetite for libertarianism in light of the rise of populism?
And the what?
But in light of the rise of populism.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know that it'll be the Libertarian Party. The fact that Gary and I got only 4.5 million votes kind of surprised me. We thought we had a 6-lane highway right up the middle because we're fiscally conservative, and we could prove it, and socially much more open and tolerant, which I think is the superior position. And that didn't characterize either of the two major parties. But there was this very strong feeling, I got to be in the same party that Mommy and Poppy were, whether Republican or Democrat, which we just couldn't crack. So, you know, I'd like to see the Libertarian Party grow. And I just don't know. There's a sort of reflexive negative reaction towards something that's not totally known now. Now, I do think there's a chance the Republican Party might split in two over Trump. And if my prediction comes through and the Democrats take the Senate and the Democratic candidate for president is elected, then there'd be a lot of finger pointing, and you may see the party go the way of the Whigs in the 1850s, which broke up over the issue of slavery, and the Republican Party could break up over the issue of Trump. And the one half of the breakup was called the Know-Nothings, and they were the Southern pro-slavery, anti-immigrant party characterized by violent prejudice against the Catholics in that time, coming over from Italy and Germany and Ireland, and by two other things, violent rallies and conspiracy theories. So they're the lineal forebear of the Trump organization. And the other half elected Abraham Lincoln 4 years later. So that could happen again. That would be a happy ending in a way. So I think there will be some shuffling of parties. And I think the Republican Party in its current form probably cannot survive going all in with Trump in this removal in the Senate, saying we don't want to hear any witnesses, we're not going to see anything, we're happy, 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 we're whistling past the graveyard. I don't think that's going to sell historically. So I think you may see the Republican Party either crack in half and become a minor party, and maybe one of the two halves becomes, it probably wouldn't be called the Republican Party, maybe the Unity Party or the Liberty Party. and it might take the Libertarians and some other Republicans and be a new party. But I think it would take a tectonic shift like that to vault the Libertarians into post position as a party.
But
I
you,
say that with a heavy heart. I'm all for them.
you think this moment right now, if Senate Republicans don't invite more witnesses, that could be the thing that breaks the party?
Right.
Thank you, Governor. And following on Alexandra's question, my name is Adam Balling. I was recently elected chair of the local Libertarian Party chapter, and as the T-shirt shows, I campaigned for you and Governor Johnson 4 years ago. And Mr. Wildeboer, thank you for anticipating this somewhat, as did Alexandra just now, but I would like to ask more directly, if you are not nominated, would you consider very loudly and aggressively campaigning on behalf of a libertarian realignment and for a libertarian candidate? I'd also like to ask everyone else here, if you're fiscally conservative, socially laissez-faire, skeptical about war, and if Governor Weld doesn't make the Hail Mary pass to the nomination, would you please consider?
Oh, sure. I mean, I'm not going to sit out the election. You know, if the Democrats put up a centrist and it looks like that's the best way to beat Trump, then I'd go that way. If something happens and it's Trump and for some reason unacceptable Democrat, then if it's Justin Amash or the former governor of Rhode Island and the Libertarian Party, yeah, that's definitely a possibility.
All right, well, we'd love to have you back in town.
And
Look us up on Facebook.
One thing I'm not going to do is run as a third-party candidate, so I will be supporting somebody else.
What, here again in Illinois, there are some Republicans who are, vociferous in opposing Trump, but the way you're pitching a lot of this, we don't hear from a lot of people in the Republican Party. When you talk to other folks in the Republican Party, do you feel like you're an aberration in kind of how you feel about these
Well,
things?
no office holders will say what I've been saying here tonight because it's too strong for them. People on the ground in New Hampshire, absolutely. So those are ordinary citizens without anything to lose, and President Trump doesn't have, a bullseye on their back, and if they step out of line, he's not going to run someone against them in the primary because they're not holding political office. So when you're holding political office, it never made me toe the line at all, but seems to make a lot of people toe the line, the party line.
Hello, Governor Weld. What is your favorite movie?
Favorite movie?
Yes.
Well, it's a close one. I think number one comes out at Buckaroo Banzai Through the Eighth Dimension. It's a wonderful sort of softcore sci-fi movie. Repo Man is another one, and I love these movies that go back and forth from an ordinary movie and sci-fi. MIB is a favorite. Men in Black. I'm not easily amused, but I'm amused by those movies a lot.
We'll leave them. Did the mic get taken away? Okay, so if there are any final questions, we can maybe go to those. Just raise your hand, get the attention of Jake at the back there. But otherwise, I'm wondering what do you see as the most likely path for the Republican Party after 2020? You said you said we might be at a breaking point here for the Republican Party. What do you see for the party 10 years down the road? What is Trump's legacy with the party?
He'll have no legacy. He's too far out there.
But he's certainly impacted the party.
Well, yeah, he has. I mean, right now he's hypnotized the party. But I'm one of the minority who thinks that after he's gone, it'll be, thank God that's over. Was that a bad dream? Did it actually happen, or was it just a bad dream? And people go back to the ordinary practice of politics without having to be mean and vindictive about everything, which people have gotten just so inured to that. And my hope is that, you know, if there's another guy that comes along and tries to act like that, that the, you know, the people like myself and many others would blow the whistle a little earlier than the next time. So I don't think he'll have a lasting legacy, because his legacy would be, except for the thing I said earlier about he tapped a vein in terms of people who felt that they had been left behind, and guess what? Maybe they were right. And, you know, his policies aren't all wrong. I love the Space Force and the space program. I love, you know, I loved it when the Russians and the Americans had joint space stations, because it meant we were both looking in the same direction at something we were going to achieve together, as opposed to staring daggers at each other. You know, let's face it, he's got tremendous political skill and animal cunning and the nerve of a burglar, which is, it's very useful in politics and in burglary, of course. You can't lose your nerve. So he's a talented guy. I don't think his talents are in business. I think they're in a certain kind of politics, and it's very obvious that he has these skill sets from all those years in reality TV. Now, I spent 8 years on the stage myself in Gilbert and Sullivan and the Hasty Pudding theatricals, generally wearing women's clothes. So standing up on stage in high heels with a wig and making a fool of yourself on stage for 3 hours every night for 2 months, what better preparation for politics could there be?
And on that inspiring note, I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. Thank you for your questions. Thank you to the University of Chicago and the Institute of Politics and Governor Weld.
Thank you, folks. Thank you.